Hello, everybody. We are going to be starting a new unit in criminal law, and the unit is called Criminal Procedure or Due Process. What due process means, due process refers to all of the rights that you have coming to you, all of the protections that you are owed by the government if they want to prosecute you for a criminal offense. So due process refers to a great many things, but for the purposes of this introduction course, we're going to focus on a few areas of due process. We're going to look at the arrest process. We're going to look at individuals' rights to privacy. This will have to do with search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. We're going to look at the right to an attorney as guaranteed under the Sixth Amendment. The right to remain silent as under the Fifth Amendment, and additional trial procedures and protections that people have. So the first thing that we are going to look at in terms of this due process is the concept of federalism, which you should be familiar with. You've studied it many times in U.S. history. But federalism is the separation of powers between state governments and the federal government. So we've gone over this in class. There are 51 major governments in the United States because every state has a government, and then you have the federal government. And under federalism, you have the delegated powers for the federal government, you have reserved powers to the states, and then you have, does anyone remember what the shared powers between state and federal government is called? Yes, the concurrent powers. So if you look at this Venn diagram and you look at the third dot down, criminal justice is a concurrent power, meaning that state governments have the right to control a criminal justice system, and the federal government has a right to run the criminal justice system. This brings up the important issue of what we call jurisdiction, right? Jurisdiction, the official definition of jurisdiction, is the official power to make legal decisions or judgments. But what that means in terms of criminal law is if someone commits a crime or is accused of committing a crime, which government is in charge of it? Now, in some cases, that's pretty easy, right? Like, for example, Brenton Butler, in the documentary that you watched, he committed his crime in Florida. So therefore, which government do you think would be in charge of that trial? Correct, it would be Florida. If Brenton was a citizen of Florida but was visiting relatives in Texas when he allegedly committed a crime, where do you think the trial would take place? Correct, it would take place in Texas because Texas would have the jurisdiction because the crime was committed in Texas. If a crime is committed in New York State has that jurisdiction. If a crime is committed in California, California State has that jurisdiction. However, it's not quite so clear as that. So before we discuss jurisdiction a little bit more closely, I want you to understand separation of powers at the federal level and at the state level, just because it's important to understand that when we're discussing criminal law. So most of you, again, you've studied this many times, you know that at the federal level, we have three branches of government, right? We have the legislative branch, we have the executive, and judicial. In terms of criminal law, what this means is that the legislative branch makes criminal laws, right? The executive enforces criminal laws, and the judicial branch interprets the meaning of law and holds trials. Now, this is the federal separation of powers, but I want you to know that the federal is a macrocosm of the state, which is a mini version of that. So at the state levels, every state has a legislative branch that makes laws. Every state has an executive, right? It's not a president, it's a governor. And every state has a judicial branch, which is where the trials would be held, right? They would decide innocence or guilt as to someone accused of a crime. Now, in terms of jurisdiction, the vast majority of criminal trials that are held in the United States are held at the state level. So of all of the criminal trials and charges that are going on in the United States, the vast majority, probably somewhere near 90% or more, are at the state level. So when does the federal government get involved in prosecuting a crime? Well, anytime there's a crime committed on federal property, that would be the federal government's jurisdiction. So if someone commits a crime in a post office, because the post offices are regulated by the federal government, not states, that would be a federal crime. In addition, if somebody was to assault a postal worker, right, to attack them while they were in the course of completing their official job, the federal government would take the jurisdiction there. In addition, the federal government gets involved if a crime crosses across multiple state lines. So if someone commits a crime and they kidnap someone, for example, and then they take them into another state, because now you have two states involved, the federal government might have jurisdiction. Additionally, if someone is trafficking drugs and they're driving through multiple states to sell drugs, they're committing crimes across multiple jurisdictions, the federal government can get involved there. In addition, anything involving smuggling something into the country. For example, if someone drives from Mexico into California, that would be a federal offense. Now, additionally, California would also be able to prosecute that person and go after them because that's dual jurisdiction. Some cases, the state government as well as the federal government can go after that individual. Another example of federal jurisdiction would be at airports, because the federal government regulates all of the airports in the country. Any crime committed in an airport would fall under federal jurisdiction. So with that understanding, if Brenton Butler had killed Marianne Stevens, or whoever killed Marianne Stevens, if he had killed Marianne Stevens at an airport, then that would be a federal case. But because it was done in a hotel, Florida state takes over that jurisdiction. It doesn't have anything to do with the federal government at that point. So generally, when a crime is committed, the jurisdiction is clear. Sometimes it's not, and federal agents and state agencies will work together to kind of figure out who's going to take the lead on it. But other times, a case can start out in a state court and then through the appeal system get bounced up enough where it enters into the federal system, perhaps even going up to the Supreme Court, which we're going to be looking at in the next video.